In the last lecture, we discussed the phenomenon of vagueness and saw why that phenomenon can lead to paradox. In this lecture, and the ones to follow, I want to show how the phenomenon of vagueness can lead not just to paradox, but also to fallacies. Today, we're going to talk about a particular kind of fallacy called a conceptual slippery slope fallacy that results from the phenomenon of vagueness. So what's a conceptual slippery slope fallacy? Well, let me give you a definition. A conceptual slippery slope fallacy is an argument that exploits the vagueness of the category that's involved in the argument in order to argue that there's no significant difference between things that belong to that category and things that don't belong to that category. Okay, so let me give you some examples of this definition. So here's one example. Consider this argument. Premise 1. A person who is 1 meter in height is short. Premise 2. A difference of 1 millimeter is not a significant difference. Certainly not a significant difference in human height. Maybe it's a significant difference in some things, but not in human height. Premise 3. A person who is 2 meters in height is tall. Conclusion. There's no significant difference between being short and being tall. Okay, now notice this is different than the argument from the heap. The argument from the heap would have gone from the premise that a person who's 1 meter in height is short to the conclusion that a person who is 2 meters in height or 5 meters in height or any height at all is also going to be short. That's not what this argument is saying. This argument allows that there's a difference between being short and being tall, but the difference just isn't significant because the difference is made up of a series of differences, each one of which is not significant. Right? The difference between being 1 meter in height and being 2 meters in height is made up of a series of 1 millimeter differences, and 1 millimeter differences are not significant differences in human height. So the argument concludes the 1 meter difference in human height between a 1 meter person and a 2 meter person, that 1 meter difference in human height is itself not a significant difference. So there is no significant difference, the argument concludes, between being short and being tall. Okay, now that's a fallacy. And it's a fallacy not because its premises are false. Actually, its premises are, I think, not false. I think its premises are true. It's a fallacy because the premises don't support the conclusion. Remember, that's what makes it a fallacy, is that the premises don't support the conclusion, even if they are true. Why don't the premises support the conclusion? Well, here's why. The conclusion says that a height difference of 1 meter is not significant. And the premises say that a height difference of 1 millimeter is not significant. And of course, a height difference of 1 meter is made up of a series of 1,000 height differences of 1 millimeter. But just because a millimeter height difference is not significant, and a meter height difference is made up of 1,000 1 millimeter height differences, it doesn't follow that a 1 meter height difference is not significant. Differences that are significant can be made up out of a bunch of differences that are individually insignificant. So that's why this argument right here is a fallacy. Consider another example to illustrate the same point. A person who owns only 1 penny is poor. A difference of 1 penny is not a significant difference in human wealth, right? You don't become significantly wealthier or less wealthy by gaining or losing a penny. And a person who owns a gazillion pennies is not poor, they're rich. Well, from those 3 premises, this argument concludes, there's no significant difference between being poor and being rich. Okay, once again, the argument starts off with 3 premises, each of which is quite plausibly true. I think it is true. But then it draws a conclusion that's ridiculous. Well, why? Well, it's because the argument is one in which the premises don't really support the conclusion. So even if the premises are true, they don't support the conclusion. They don't give us good reason to believe that the conclusion is true. And that's because even if the difference between being poor and being rich is made up out of a series of 1 penny differences, and even if a 1 penny difference is insignificant, it doesn't follow that the difference between being poor and being rich is insignificant, right? A difference that's made up out of a bunch of insignificant differences can still itself be significant. Just because its components are insignificant doesn't mean that it is insignificant. Compare this to the following point. Just because each person in a group is not powerful, does that mean that the group is not powerful? No. Sometimes composites, collections, can have properties, can have features, can belong to categories that their individual members don't have, don't belong to. Right? So even if each individual member of a group is not powerful, that doesn't mean the group is not powerful. And similarly, even if each one penny component of the difference between poverty and wealth is not a significant difference, that doesn't mean that the complete difference, the series of one penny differences, is not a significant difference. So that's why this is a fallacy. Right? These arguments, which we'll call conceptual slippery slope arguments, are arguments in which the premises could all be true. There are many conceptual slippery slope arguments in which the premises are all true, but the premises don't support the conclusion. And what makes the argument tempting is the vagueness of the category that the argument makes use of, the category of tall, the category of poor, whatever category it is that the argument makes use of. If it's a vague category, then you can construct a conceptual slippery slope argument that uses that category. In the next lecture, we'll see how vague categories can give rise to other slippery slope arguments as well.